All right. Okay. Complex networks. So these projectors remain pretty terrible. So there's better resolution in the slides. Anyway, some things won't appear that well. But all right. Okay. So all right. So I'm going to give you a bit of a course orientation. There'll be a bit of I'll go over complex networks again, just sort of this introductory stuff. Some of you, of course, haven't seen this. Some of you have. I'm going to say some of these things again. There'll be a few things I basically want to tell all of you about. Right, so we have a website. Good. That'll get updated as we go along. There's this course tweets. So there are tweets. The acronym is CONCS. We had PUCs. Now we're going to have CONCS. Okay, and so you'll have Spring CONCS 2014 is the official course hashtag. All right. There's a whole setting system that gets that. So there you go, we try to be hilarious. Careful experiment confirms that the George Washington Bridge is an edge with very high betweenness. That's a link to a certain story recently. So things will be here, you'll see. So I video this stuff and I'll put it all up online. Which of course you never have to look at again. But it's there, but they'll be mixed in with the slides. This will be all recorded here. We have a logo, which is good. Lots of other things. You can just explore this website. So this is academic output from this course and the previous one, the Principles of Complex Systems course. The number of papers that have, students that have been involved in these courses in some way. These papers have been, at least tangentially related. There's only one where I just wrote the paper by myself, and it was because of work that I did in the course. So there's a bit of that, but most of it, all of them, apart from those, they're all papers with students. So that's a very nice output. There are a couple of things. So I haven't taught this since 2011 due to sabbatical and various other things. So I'm excited to get it going again. Great course, a lot of fun. And so there are some things that have been sitting there for a while, like this is some flight patterns and so on. So these are a few years old. There is a blog. Remember blogs? There's still a few blogs around before they get destroyed by Facebook. So they're fun. So I might add to that. It had a whole bunch of stuff going on there. Anyway, so lots of material to explore there. All right, so yeah, and there's our Twitter account. All right, so you should follow that on Twitter. That is how I actually will give you information. Very occasionally I will send out an email, but that is very unseemly, and I don't want to offend anyone and make you feel sad. So it will come. So it's going to be full on Twitter. Even in emergency, perhaps. All right, so what is this? Let's get rid of that. I do spend a lot of time. No one can really explain this on making these slides. There are a whole, there's all sorts of madness behind them. This is the sort of thing you have behind it, right? So it's all in Beamer and so on. So things are updatable, improvable, so your feedback and horrible things that happen in the classroom, I will remedy for you. All right. Let's see. So I think that's kind of the start. All right. Good. Okay. So let's see. Things are actually working. Yes. Okay. All right. So we have a production team. Silly and Lammy are good guys. This one is helping someone get through the flu right now, although his temperature remains constantly at room temperature, so he's really kind of fine. All right. Okay. Right. So I'm part of a team, the Computational Story Lab. So I work with Chris Danforth, and a number of you people are involved in that, which is cool. Some of them are sitting here, and we've, really nice team, lovely group, and if you're interested, you might want to talk to me about joining that group at some point if you get excited about doing some research and so on. This happens. We have undergrads become grads and have great time, really. Okay, right. Really a lot of fun. Okay, so this is sort of a brief history of my work in a way, right? So this is a figure from each paper, and I don't put out millions of papers. I tend to put out ones that took an enormous amount of time to make. There's a lot of suffering. And anyway, so there's lots of different things, and some of this will definitely be in this course, but you can see river networks. We're going to talk about branching networks in general, so that's a really fundamental kind of structure. It's a lot of beautiful fractal structure and so on. It's actually one of the first areas where this idea of a fractal, not the word. Mandelbrot came up with that later on, but that notion of this fractal nature was first sort of quantified, actually. So that's in the 1940s. So that's pretty cool. And of course, we've moved to, what's that?
Hurst.
Oh, yeah, so Hurst is involved with roughness. Horton, there was a fellow called Horton, actually. So it's the 40s and the 50s, there's another fellow Strahler. So we'll talk about that. So the same kind of patterns are in blood networks, so a lot of natural branching networks have these things. And how they get to have the particular forms they do that's still a difficult problem. That's still something that people fight about. So, but quantifying them, we've come a long way. Okay, so there's a little bit of that at the top. There's some things like organizational networks. There's some other mad things we've been doing recently, measuring happiness and emotion in global populations. This is spreading of influence. There's different kinds of contagion and so on. These are some crazy things of funny shapes growing like they might be trees in forests, which is the inspiration. This is the SARS epidemic, for example. Trying to understand why we couldn't predict that at all. This is Shadow Networks is our most recent one. There's about 15 authors on this, and it's about trying to find nodes or locate where nodes might be hiding in networks. So obviously, NSA style kind of behavior. But if there's some sort of communication pattern, and so it could be used for good and bad, like all of these things, but it could be that maybe you're measuring something about proteins and so on, you're missing one, right? There's something that's harder to measure. The techniques you're using don't pick up this particular gene or whatever it is. Which is true of that kind of mapping, right? We have techniques that work for a lot of them, but are harder to some parts of say DNA are harder to get at. So yeah, lots of pieces there. So anyway, that's a little picture history. Right. Okay. So I mentioned a few of these things. We will usually start at 2:30. I've worked out this magic box here, and there's of course website. There's a Twitter handle. Right. So these are the important things to come back to. You can certainly communicate with that handle, right? So you can write to this handle and complain and say things and ask questions, which is nice, right? And it's also good to throw in that hashtag. You don't have to, but okay. So so there's a syllabus. Some of you have seen that. You can download that guy. Let's see if that will function properly. Error not found. Great. That link is okay. I'll fix that link. It's here though on the website. All right. Oh, God, that's horrible. So Adobe has some problem with resolution, right? The way they. Okay. So right, there's some stuff here. You can look at this. It's the thing if you like to print it out and carry it around. That's good. But I'll talk about most of these things in these slides. That's just a good thing to have, an actual real one. Paper products, but I'm not going to print them out and give them to you. That seems terrible. I used to do that, but I think it's bad. You look on your tiny little screens, right? I'm not sure if they're optimized for tiny little screens, but maybe that's a good screen. So this is part of the graduate certificate in complex systems. So principles of complex systems and modeling complex systems are the two central ones. Then there are a series of A-type and B-type, and the A-type ones, this is one of them. I mean, the thing is, networks is a huge deal, as I'll say. I mean, networks is just a gigantic story, right? And we kind of always knew that, but data appeared and we, started to describe the real world properly, and there's just been a gigantic explosion in work on this stuff, as I'll show, and I'll show the interest, since the late 1990s. And it's just going to keep going, right? Many real complex systems are made of networks. All right. So it's a sequel to POX. I had some other bad names in here to maybe not amuse you with, but see all of these bad things, course settings, okay, less. Right, so the complex networks edition, complex networks, the POX strikes, right? There are a few anagrams in here, plot, XMOX, right? All right. So that's actually a little, I might use that for your assignments, right? So when I make them, it randomly chooses a name for the course. All right. So, all right. Yeah, course settings. There you go. Pretty ridiculous. All right. Yes. Okay, good. All right. Okay. Okay, so these slides are made with grade B bits, grade A, grade B. Like maple syrup, grade B is what you want, actually. It's a little confusing. It's bad branding, but grade B is actually good. So locally made. So we will have these, the presentation version, which has these little reveals in it, so I can go through it and, you know, kind of control what I'm doing. There's a flat one, which is the sort of thing you might look at any other time, really, right? Which just slops the frames. Each one of these is a frame, and right, okay. So that's the thing you would want to look at, and on the website it'll have that first. All right. There's also a handout. This is harking back to the days of paper. It's a 3x2 version, and you can print it out, and it gets rid of the background and all that sort of stuff. So if you know, some people really like to do it, and that's fine. So hopefully that will work. I think they still get made properly. You can navigate, so these little things will take you back and forth just like a web page. They're a little bit tiny and small, but that's what they do. There's a search button in it and so on, so they're kind of their own little environments. Font Awesome. I'm excited about Font Awesome. I got one of my colleagues mentioned Font Awesome last year, and so I spent a couple of days getting Font Awesome to work in LaTeX. So there's a web link will be in these PDFs. They look like this, right? So you can see, you can click on it, it'll take you to this should take you to something, hopefully, yeah, there you go, Google, something very exciting. Okay, so you can see that as you go through it. References look like this. There'll be a little superscript. You should be able to click on it, and okay, I went to this one. And there's an extra bonus is that for many of these, you can get the PDF, right? Which, you know, this course is connected to the original journal papers as much as possible, and there are several that you should really read. This is sort of the one of the classics in complex systems. Basically slapping physicists around, biophysicists, one of the great physicists of the last 100 years, saying, you know, stop being so full of yourselves, everyone else is doing real science, right? And you other people who think you're not doing real science, just wake up. Probably everyone from every other field thought, what are you talking about? But anyway, that's a classic. That's a good one to read. Okay, so that's the structure. Yes, that's good. So not I don't have a PDF for everything. It's just stuff that I've scanned. In some cases, they're, of course, ones I've downloaded. But these harken back to the day when I, was a graduate student and used to have to do things like go to the library and photocopy pieces. And then I got a scanner, and I'm thrilled with this little scanner. So a number of the papers you'll get are actually scanned. There are books that are linked to on Amazon. Not that you should buy them. It's just that books I can't link to with a book. So, and all of this is a bit of a mixture. It's actually Z-LaTeX now as well, which is pretty nuts. Z-LaTeX with an X. Awesome. So sorry, it's very geeky. Syllabus. I will fix things up. As I said, these slides, I'm rebuilding them from a few years ago, so there'll probably be a few hiccups, but they're alive. Emacs. Yes. Lots of Emacs. Yes, if there's one thing you should learn in life, it's Emacs. Everything else will be easier. It will take a lot of time, but it'll be a lot of fun. Okay, you can do everything with Emacs. Okay. Oh, look. Okay, so, terrific. So I figured out how to embed videos in here, and of course it doesn't really work. Why wouldn't that work? Oh, it's because it's going to be this. It's because Adobe is crazy? Is it Adobe? Oh, it's trying to do it. All right. Well, we'll see if it can handle itself. Okay. So this is season 6. 6 seasons in a movie. We're going to call these things episodes. They're naturally bottle episodes, which is hilarious because you guys are stuck in the same room, right? You know the capsule episode, but right, there's a link to tvtropes.com, which is a pretty fun website. It was started because of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Had so many tropes and themes that they played around with that, someone starts a website and writes down all the, and this season of Friends or whatever, on the 6th episode, it was a such and such type episode. And, my God. Okay. Why did that happen? You are so bad. Yeah, it's trying to do it, right? There was a cat involved. There was even a cat involved. Is it, I wonder if it's sometimes it's a
Yeah,
all right.
Yeah. We're going to talk about the network models.
So that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's actually our neighbor's cat.
Why
So
things take off.
it just appeared today because it's warmed up. Great cat. Okay, so all these slides will be up there, and it will sometimes involve cats. Yeah. Okay, that'll get better. Now, this is a bit hard to read, but I stuck it in there. Okay. I don't know why that didn't work. Weird. This is roughly where we're going. This will change. I'll update this as we go along, but it's going to be an overview, which probably will go into Thursday because of the little bit of delay today. Branching networks, I've got a couple of pieces there I want to talk about. I think because we missed a batch of stuff in Principles of Complex Systems, I can maybe put a little bit of that in, but you guys have seen it, so yeah, I don't want to hurt you too much. So there's that. There's optimal transportation. How do you structure things so that you move stuff the best way around, right? And it could be redistribution, or it could be delivery from, right? So the heart is sort of you've got a central location you're delivering out to the characters outside, the capillaries, whichever one you want. And then you bring it back, so you have these two networks on top of each other. There's redistribution, maybe mail, for example, right? Or the internet, of course, that's a bigger thing now. So how do you structure things to do that? Well, it depends on the cost, the burden, right? How much it costs to move stuff around and so on. So that's some really beautiful stuff there. Really fantastic. And there's real data there. So we'll see, for instance, it depends whether you've got a public kind of situation or a private one, right? So where do you, this is connecting to say, where do you put your Starbucks and where do you put your hospitals? What are you trying to optimize? Slightly different intentions in both cases. Where do you put your McDonald's, right? And so it's interesting to see what's been done on purpose, accidentally, and so on. So we have some, that's really, really very nice. Random networks is a very beautiful field. I think I lost the little guy. I don't want to show you that again. It's gone away. Anyway, random networks. So pure random networks, which pure mathematicians have studied for a long time, absolutely do not exist in the real world. You will not find one. But they're the ones you get if you get a big box of networks. They're labeled, right? So each node has a label, but otherwise they're random, right? The random links, and you reach in, you pick one out. It will be a so-called pure random network, Erdős-Renyi random network, and we'll come to those. But you will find them in boxes. So you find them in mathematicians' heads. That's where you find them. And they're fun to play with, and they give you a few ideas about things, absolutely. There's things like phase transitions and so on, like giant components. But in the real world, you never find them. But you do find lots of randomness. You just have to add a certain amount more structure, right? So there are nodes that have many more friends, for example, than you would individuals in these networks that have many more friends, whatever type they are, humans or anything else, than you typically see in these random ones. Okay, so we'll get to that. And there's a lot of nice math you can do with that. So there's a bit of a mixture. I mean, we will generally be doing, the mathematics involved will generally be for the pursuit of understanding reality, right? There'll be a little bit of inspired by reality, but not applicable to. But, my approach to being a scientist is to stay on the side of, try and do things that matter. So we won't veer off course too much into mathematical madness at all. So there's a lot on contagion. That's just a huge deal, right? Stuff spreading around. Big deal. All sorts of things. And the end part here, depending on how we go, will be about structure detection, right? So you've got this big, complicated mess. You know that individuals interact in some way. And you may be able to, it could be all sorts of things, right? It could be a protein-protein interaction. Could be the way people move around. It could be all sorts of kinds of networks where it's not obvious. I mean, so river networks you can look at, right? You have satellite pictures. You can say, okay, that's what it looks like. So there's, it's embedded in 2 dimensions and sort of a warped 2 dimensions. But a lot of the networks we have are very, very high dimensional, or a lot of systems we have that have a interaction network structure involved are very high dimensional, and you can't just put them on a page. We try to, but that's hard. So I'll come back to that again and again. So one of the things that's been really worked on very hard for the last, 10 to 15 years is so-called structure detection or community detection. So you have this horrible big mess. In a sense, you could think of just a giant matrix, right? We'll talk about adjacency matrix, right? So I is connected to J. There's some weight of connection between them, and it could be directional and so on. This is just this monstrous matrix. How do you move everyone around so that these guys are they're in the same group. They actually do seem to, like, their friends know each other. They're actually really part of a community. Maybe that community is part of a bigger community. How do you rearrange everything so that that pops out? So that's hard. There've been a number of competing methods, and it's really, really a beautiful area, and people cite each other like crazy there, as you'll see. Okay, so projects. That's sort of a backbone thing here. I think it's going to be about, I wrote down 36% of the grade, but that might change. So the idea is to work on something during the semester, right? And we're going to have a theme, which would be stories, actually. So you don't have to work on this, but I think we could do some cool things here. And I'll talk about this some more, not necessarily today, later on. But anything to do with stories, narratives, languages. If you have your own projects in your own field and it's to do with whatever it is, that's fine. But this is a very, very rich area, tons of data now. We can do all sorts of good things. So develop your proposal early on, and it can be anything. If you're an undergrad, you might want to just work on a piece that is well developed, or it's high profile, it's been published, or we can talk about that, and just understand it, right? That's an important part of becoming a scientist. So that will be good, and if you're a graduate student, maybe but we can sort it out. A couple of talks. There's a short talk about 4 or 5 weeks in, and where it's 3 minutes, 4 minutes each. Many of you know about this already. And it always works out well. It's always a nice thing. People get to present just a nutshell of the story, and very enjoyable. So that's actually, that's used in a lot of, well, not a lot of, but a number of research conferences. There's sometimes 30 seconds, which is insane, right? People actually in a queue, they have all your slides. You're allowed one slide, basically. And it's just, you get pulled off if you keep talking. So it's a good, it's hard to make good, clean, short things. All right. You can use the VAC, the Advanced Computing Center. If you don't know about that, we can talk about it. Coding is a big deal. And so that's just part of what we do now, right? So that is available. We have lots of data. We have Twitter, for example. We have 10% of all tweets, which some of you have been playing around with. Other people are interested. It's just, there's so many questions you can ask. There are many bad questions you can ask, but there are lots of good questions. So it's a extremely interesting data set. So we just managed to get a connection to Twitter years ago. So that's going back to 2008, and it keeps going. So about 10%. All right. And we talked a little bit about this, the academic output, right? So we have 16 papers. There's going to be a whole bunch coming really in the next year. They're all sitting there. Okay, so, and we'll talk about projects soon. All right? Okay, cool. I like to say this, repeat this. I think this is a nice thing, but especially if you're a graduate student, you tend to end up in this realm of things, right, where you're producing this monstrous thesis, and someone asks you, what is it? And you basically have to give them the whole book. It has to come out of you, And so a great challenge is, and this is really a knowledge thing, this is not just marketing, right, or brand. It is that too, but it really, well, when it's done well, it's really about knowledge. You need to be able to move up and down these scales, and you need to be able to present your story as well as you can very quickly, and of course that should be in the title. Or movies, you have log lines, right? There's the title, and then the log line is about maybe a sentence or two that describes what happens, the Wicked Witch, blah, 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 blah. And that's the thing that that's the sell. There's the title, and then you give them the log line, and Okay, right, so that's part of what we're doing here a little bit. There's a longer piece, there's a very short piece where you talk for a few minutes. Okay, I'll point you to a couple of other things. I need to add some more to this. I know there's, I meant to do that, okay. There is there is this online course, but there's also Lada Adamic has an online, I think it's Coursera, one of the MOOCs. Is it? The MOOC producers? Yeah. MOOC, very, very terrible acronym. Just really, just doesn't sound good. It's like a bad guy in New Jersey, right? Like Supernatural, where you call each other You know this, right? You're from New Jersey. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of textbooks. There aren't many. There are just very few textbooks around. I mean, which is okay. I mean, we're still developing this field. There are popular books, and I'll point to those. So Mark Newman, who's done a tremendous amount of work over the years, also at Michigan, he's in physics, has his own textbook. John Kleinberg, who's in computer science, MacArthur Genius Award, quite rightly. Brilliant guy, lovely guy. He has a book with Easley, who's in economics at Cornell, so it's based on a course they taught. So it's it's going to have that kind of flavor, but it is a textbook. There are review articles. These are all physics-ish, I guess. This is this is a math, industrial and applied math, but they come from these realms. But this is just to give you an idea of how well this field is growing, how rapidly it's grown, and how much it matters. So this is in reverse time, right? So this is 2002. So 12,000 citations is good. Nearly 13. That's good. That's pretty good. That's more than almost all scientists will ever have total, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I mean, it depends on the field, and physicists are crazy, and they'll cite each other a bit. And it's some fields are slower and so on. But and you can normalize for those things. But wow, this is really a lot. So it's healthy. It's healthy. Crazy. Okay, so there are just a couple of things you might want to read through. I know that's 2006 is the latest one. I'm not sure if there's another review piece recently. It's definitely still going, right? Physicists tend to kind of just hammer things to pieces, and I'll mention that again, right? Once they get inside it, here's something we can kind of quantify and do some math with. They go crazy. So they've been feasting off this, and I am sort of one of these people, but they've been feasting off these things, this field for nearly, for 15, 16 years. It still has legs, but we've definitely figured out a lot of important pieces. All right, so, okay, very basic definitions. This is going to be very simple. Wow, is that what that's doing? Yeah. Ooh. Some very simple things. So complex, beautiful word. So framing matters, just as I was saying before. And if you go back in time, you had fields like cybernetics, right, run by absolute geniuses. Norbert Wiener and these sorts of characters. I mean, brilliant people. Herbert Simon was involved. So you have all these people involved in trying to kind of, get at this system story. But it doesn't sound very good, right? It's sort of like an Asimov. Well, Asimov actually was probably better at branding things, but it does sound a little weird. Yeah, 950 sort of thing. Anyway, but complex systems, it's a little hard to argue with, right? Complex is just a good word. It's an everyday word. It means what what it means to people. It's fine. We're not changing it. We do that sometimes in science. We take a good, healthy word and give it a alternate meaning somewhere else, and then pretend it kind of means the original one as well, if we need to. It's self-organized criticality, whatever that means. But this is good. It's folded. It's not simple. This is a very nice origin, right, with folds. Very good. Okay, so that's good. Networks is kind of a different, more workman-like kind of word, and I'll give you that a bit. But this is just to say, very quickly, complex system, right? They're everywhere. They're ubiquitous. You get this kind of question like, what's a complex? Well, fluids are a complex system. They really are, and it just turns out we can describe them with differential equations. And so we got at those guys. And we can think about how to describe them just by drawing some boxes and little cubes and imagining pressure and so on. We figured that out, and that was a very brilliant kind of piece of work. But a lot of systems aren't describable in that way, so they're a bit harder, right? We need algorithmic descriptions, and we need to simulate things. So no centralized control is important, because otherwise the whole thing is not interesting. There's obviously nonlinearity usually somewhere. If it's linear, then it's all solvable. So this is almost, some of this is redundant almost. Often feedback loops. They're often open systems, right? They're being driven. There's energy coming out and somehow being lost, right? Although there's a universe, I guess. Memory, of course, that's a big deal, obviously in human systems, but it's true in all sorts of other systems as well. I mean, evolutionary systems, you're building on what was there before. This is this structure detection stuff that you often see this appearance of hierarchical structures. I'm going to put in there evolution. There's some recent work that suggests that modular kinds of structures are things you might expect to see through evolution, and indeed you see them appearing through evolution, in part because of all the various things, robustness and so on, but also evolvability, which is, so evolution will produce things that are evolvable, right? They're the ones that are going to just, and so what sort of form do they have? Well, they tend to have this modular structure. Boundaries can be a little tricky. More is different, I mentioned before. This is this paper by Anderson, going back a long time now, 40 years. And lots of things can be complex, right? So all sorts of systems can have what we might call complex now. And there's a huge transition that's happening in academia. There are, not really departments, but institutes and other sorts of bodies within universities being built all over the place that are based now on data, huge computing, right? It's happening all around the US, it's happening in Europe. And it's just unavoidable. It's science just managing to catch up with, get itself going. It's certainly in fields like medicine and biology, this has been happening for a long time, right? Deployed all of this machinery to advance things. But even there, better measurements coming along all the time, and the problems become more and more difficult, right? So it's a really fantastic time in science, basically. It's an absolutely fantastic time. I mean, it's a very difficult time, but people have to come out of their little disciplines where it's been a nice place to live in their little burrows, nice and comfy in your little topology burrow, like just sneaking around. But you really, really have to come out, and you really have to go and talk to other people. So, the statistics has become a big field. Suddenly it's like, everyone cares about that, but it's not everything, right? Statisticians traditionally don't, my view, describe things. They describe things well, but not the mechanisms, right? That's the physicists do this, and then do some obnoxious statistics on the end to show that they were right. But and engineers make things that work, maybe, right? And computer scientists, generally, they're a bit like engineers, right? They'll make a neural network or something, and it'll reproduce this thing, and I don't care why. Like, it just does it, and that's so machine learning is a big piece now, and that's fine. I mean, it just maybe there'll be limits to how well we can understand things. Something we talked about quite a bit in principles, I guess. Okay, so anyway, it's exciting times. We've kind of got the right handle of things. And systems are not going to go away. Data is not going to go away unless we do something really bad with ourselves. It's only going to get more and more, rich and complicated. But in a way, we're really just at the edge of this kind of big data thing. And so there's a lot of data, like Twitter, for example, is just a ton of data. It's incredibly hard to cope with, and you find patterns and so on. But that itself is a very thin slice of, every utterance made by people, and right? I mean, there's who's on Twitter, there's what they choose to say. It's a very right. So that's just one example. But suddenly we've got so much data, we think, this is everything. But of course it's not. Anyway, so that's a battle we'll keep going with. Cities are being instrumented in all sorts of ways. Lots of very interesting things going on in cities around the world. New York in particular, right? They're building large living complexes where I think this is happening in Toronto too. Part of the deal is if you get to live in this place, you don't pay probably as much as you would, but they get to know everything about you, right? Or some amount, like when you come and go and kinds of things you do and so on, right? To analyze it. So there's a CUSP, which is part of NYU and a few other, and it's affiliated with a number of other places around the world. I think Delhi maybe, I think that's right, and certainly somewhere in India, and so I guess it's IIT, and then Toronto, a couple of other places like that. So, very interesting. Tons of data, and people aren't sure what that's going to do, but you need to be able to handle it, able to understand it. All right, okay. This is, wow, it's terrible. I'm just throwing these things up just to give us a little. This is what we ended with, actually. Principles of complex systems, right? So we kind of have this story here where, why do we get complexification, right? So that's a great kind of problem, right? There is the story, of course. We have the Big Bang, and then stars, and then planets form around that. We have this long history, 14 billion years, and then eventually maybe we get to understand how life's starting, which I think is the advent of algorithms, actually, right? When does that kind of emerge out of raw, cold physics and randomness? It's just a lot of physics to start with, like things just smash into, and then you get some if-then loops and if-then clauses and some for loops, and that's a different kind of business. So, there are a lot of things we can describe. When we understand this complexification, there are a lot of areas. So, as I said, fluids, where we have differential equations, and there are these micro to macro stories, right? We talk about the micro things, and we think about how they might interact, and we get a story for that, and then we get a macroscopic behavior, right? So that's a just very natural thing. If there's lots of entraining across scales, that's difficult. But if you have this, that's one of the great. That's why fluid mechanics works so well, because you do have micro to macro. It's this nice separation of scales, so to speak, as it said. There's that sort of thing. Then we get out to evolution, and that's sort of these algorithms and games that are being played out in this physical space. We get up to the information dealing with itself and interacting with itself, which is a kind of a crazy thing. These things are harder to, and so I'll call them the soft and squishy sciences. The framing more is different, is about this micro to macro story, right? So you have more stuff, and it's not just that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, it's that it's different from the sum of the parts, right? So, right, a tornado is not inside a water molecule. All right, so, but this boundary is moving out, right? This is a harder to measure stuff. There are more theories in some ways out here, right? Where we have less stuff pinned down, we tend to make up more things, and it's kind of amusing. Economics is a fine example. Hence the sniggering. But and if you go back in physics, I mean, we had all sorts of stories for how things, how the Earth worked and the sun and so on, and we argued about them, and there were, gods that pushed the sun across it, right? Okay, well, there might still be, but like that, we tend to have this mechanistic explanation now that most people are buying into. All right, okay, so that's just to throw a little bit of complex systems back in there. Little etymology network, right? So it's a work of nets, essentially, right? That's like right, ironwork or any of these other things. It's that kind of story. But it's interesting to look at the history of it. To start with, it's and maybe that's not quite in here. It moves out from talking about, say, animals, structures in animals, right, to railways, and then people, and then broadcasting stations. So now it's about information, and then of course computers, right? So that metaphor got lifted out. It was a very physical metaphor to start with. Net meaning like a web, of course, and of course there's the verb as well. Lots of other great words, though. I mean, it's a very enjoyable kind of word. Or, thing, a network. Web, which got stuck on the World Wide Web, call it the web, but the web and the internet are different, right? We tend to mess that up a little bit, but they're different things. Okay, lots of good words, maze and labyrinth and so on. So I always put this up. Keith Briggs was a postdoc when I was at Melbourne as an undergrad, and took upon himself to have a look at the origin of this word. So opus reticulatum, right? So work of a net, so this is Latin, so this is a brick structure that has that form. There's some all this good stuff, right? So the Geneva Bible is the first time it's written down according to the OED, which is, thus according to lots of crazy people who go through things and try to find the appearances of words. Right? Sometimes they're in jail. That's what they do all day. Let's see. So so structures in animals. We have rivers and canals. It's a lifting. This language very interesting, right? We lift. These metaphor, the way we use metaphors. Railways, and then it's electrical cables, and then distribution networks. Okay, you can look at this later on. Net was a spider web to start with by itself. Work, of course, meaning something that is in that form. But so net goes back to 888, when the English were, mostly killing each other, but occasionally someone was writing some stuff down. probably under the threat of death by a king, who then told him to write it in his name. Yeah. So, all right. Okay, good. All right. So I've said these things. So the big story, people have talked about complex systems for a long time. There's the Santa Fe Institute was founded by a bunch of Nobel laureates in, is it the 80s? Yes, and with this vision, right? Let's understand everything. Okay, we've got the quark sorted out. I'm Murray Gell-Mann. I made up the word quark. Et cetera, right? We've done this. We're all good, right? So, and maybe some small stuff, but let's go and get the big things. Let's solve all these economics problems, right? Well, we're smart people. Turns out it's really hard, right? and it was also before, the data thing took off. It really was before that, and so they were up against it. And that's really the late 90s, as I'll say. And there's a transition there, right? So, okay. So I went to the Santa Fe Institute summer school in some ancient time, maybe 96. And I know no one was born then. And there was no one else in the world, actually, right, as you might expect. All the television stuff is made up. So the 96, and there was one talk on networks at all, right? One talk that just touched on networks, and it was really super interesting. It was about the idea that if you have complex diseases, you have something going wrong. There's sort of a cascading behavior in the immune system. So, right, this sort of difficult. So if a doctor says to you, you have an idiopathic condition, that's just a very nice way of saying, I have no idea what it is, right? Idiopathic means. It's unbelievable when they use this word. But we have a number of those, right? That are very complicated and lots of different symptoms and so on. And autoimmune diseases like that. Anyway, there was a nice piece, but that was the sole kind of work on networks. Anyway, so boom, right? Changes at the end of the 1990s. So lots of systems have a complex network flavor to them. I will go through this on Thursday a little more. So suddenly the game is, it's on, right? I mean, we knew about this interacting thing. We spent a long time with, if you look back through the history of things, with lattices of all kinds of forms. And that's really kind of plastics, right, in a way. It's sort of, and real materials and so on are, of course, lattice structures of sorts. So we're obsessed with them because there are lots of lattices you can build. It was fantastic, right? So you can make them, you could see them in the real world. I mean, diamonds have this shape and blah, blah, blah. And then we got to plastics, so there's polymer science and all these things. So that takes a long time. But then networks are these more distributed, messy things. Okay. Anyway, lots of you can pull out all this math and lots of course, numerical work that you can do. Through the aughts, I guess, the approach has really been sort of stat-mech, statistical mechanics, theoretical physics, right? So these guys have been rampaging along. I think it's moving into more of, those people have been doing. Computer scientists are now sort of taking off. The last paper I pointed to used the Eureka in my little setup of papers, uses Eureka, for example. If you know about that, it's a little crazy machine learning thing that tries to produce the underlying equations describing a system. So it's a weird fusion of madness. But really scary for a physicist, right, who thinks that they should be able to figure it all out on paper, which is not really true. So there's a ton of work that's been done since 1998, and this is my little joke, right? Piranha physicus. I know some of you have seen this. They hunt in packs and they feast on new ideas. They absolutely savage things, and then they jump off. So yeah, right. It's like kids playing soccer, right? The ball squirts out, and then they all go and jump on it. Okay, and there's just sort of anyway, they're still going. Yeah. They haven't eaten at all because it's a big field. Yeah. The thing that's come up recently and in the last few years is the framing of temporal networks, which has always been there and it's been worked on in different ways, but it's a framing, and that's getting a lot of play now, which is simply that there are interactions that play out over time, right? So it's not just a big fixed network. So this has been known forever, but it's been sort of formalized, and now they're excited about that. All right. There are a couple of papers that are, wow, that's kind of weird. Oh yeah, I see. That started all off, and well, we'll get to where we can today, based on what happened. So they're very famous papers. So, and I worked with Duncan for a long time. Struggett is actually the guy I came to work with in the US, but he moved to Cornell, which was complicated when I arrived at MIT. So Uncle Steve, who's been at Cornell since '94, he says I can call him Uncle Steve. I don't. You might know him. He's written lovely stuff in the New York Times on math. It's been beautiful things. He's a great educator, and he's done lots of interesting things. His big thing over time has been synchronization, right? So he has a book called Sync. It's really a cool book. That paper has 20,000 citations as of today, close to 21,000. Was published in Nature, and this framing, small world networks, right? And it is something that we went through in great detail in Parks. But I've been involved in work that came after this. But it's basically about search, right? How do you search through these systems? Well, they could be social systems, which is partly the original inspiration. Actually, the original inspiration was grasshoppers talking to each other, crickets. A little crazy. But it is about how do you search, right? So there's the 6 degrees of separation idea, the small world idea, and it's been used even recently to figure out how to mobilize large numbers of people for a good thing. Obviously, if you're an evil genius, you could possibly get it to be done for a bad reason, but generally for trying to help in some way. So there's a lot of stuff there. All right, good. But we're not going to go on about too much here. I'll mention the essence of the model again later on. This is really just to show you that this is a big field. So 18,000 citations for this one. It appears the year after, so it's Barabazi, who's a sort of a giant character in complex systems in general. He is now at Northeastern, and Rick Albert, who's at Penn State. And so this paper appeared in Science. I mean, it helps to have a good footing, but this was, and again, so it's a Pox thing, connects back to theory that started to take hold really in the early 1900s, I suppose. But it's a rich gets richer story. It's really a rich gets richer story. And so we see that happening over and over again for networks. As they grow, nodes that have lots of friends tend to get more friends. And so that's a beautiful mechanistic story. All right. So, not all real networks are so-called scale-free networks, but many of them have that form. So, both of these things especially this one, had the sort of venerable attribute of being analytically tractable, so you could make up all sorts of models and solve them, and whether that was really mattered or not. But it was things like spreading, contagion, and so on. All right, so you start to explore these networks that are now being pinned. Right, it turns out there's just an unbelievable number of networks you could think about, and if you think about them all at once, that doesn't work out. You have to find little groups of networks that really appear in the real world and think about them. Okay, I can finish. There are a couple of popular books over the years. The Tipping Point, which is full of not very good stories. Some of them are okay. This is the way Gladwell works. His own story continues to evolve. Recently, he's been saying things like he just tells stories, not science, right? He talks to scientists who he says are not very good at telling their stories, but then he just tells stories, So no one should, use them in general ways to run large corporations or companies or countries, but of course they do, because they're said in a way that sound great. Tipping point, right? This idea that just things can go berserk because of one small thing, and this is really the wrong version. There's a lot more we could talk about here, but it's a matchstick, right? And so the idea here is something explodes because of the match, but it's pointing at the match. It's showing you the match. The match is the thing that matters. But as we'll see when we talk about contagion, it's really the way the thing is connected, and the simple analogy, as to whether things will spread or not. The simplest analogy there is forest fires, right? So you could have a big match, and if it's raining, it doesn't really matter, But we make this mistake of thinking it's the match that matters. All right, we've done some of that in Principles of Complex Systems. We'll get into some more detailed math versions there as well. Very good fun. Some very nice stuff with generating functions, actually, combinatorics. Very delicious. Okay. Very choice kind of math. All right, you will like it. Okay, sort of magical things. Okay, so some early on, these kind of books. So Mark Buchanan's a science writer. This was probably 2002 or 3. These are nice popular books. These talk about the people involved. These two talk about the people involved, but they're written by scientists. I've mentioned these characters, so Duncan and Barabazi. Duncan's now at Microsoft, right? We work together at Columbia. He's now at Microsoft Research in New York City. He was at Yahoo. Yahoo had this one good thing, and it was their research thing, and then they got rid of that. So he's moved on to Microsoft, and that's all good. I mean, it's still Microsoft, but they have tons of money, so that's all good. They're really interesting, good research people, great research. So these are early on. These books really framed the start of things. Lots of other books. I could add more books just to give you links to things. Add more books. But these are right that people felt compelled to solidify, right? So, wow, there are clocks of all different. That one's different. Okay, all right. I'm going to finish with this slide, and I'm going to believe that clock because I said it. All right. Vega Redondo, one of his students was a postdoc with us years ago. He's an economist who got excited about physics. Just to give you a bit of a sense of how all these things work. Andrea Ronaldo played rugby for Italy, and he's at Padua. Rodrigo Saturbi has been at Princeton for a long time, so this is a big book on fractal river basins, which, how do river networks appear. That's a controversial area, I would say. This is more mathematical. Duret's at Cornell. So there's some more physics and math type ones. It's a bit of a mixture. Ramu was a postdoc in my group at MIT years ago. And Vespignani is a big character at Northeastern as well. So he's got moved on to do a lot of stuff with epidemiology, right? So how things spread. And it's the right thing to do. Let's actually measure how people move around in planes and so on. How people really truly move and see what happens if we drop swine flu in, okay? There's, just to give you a sense, like sort of the tapestry of things, right? So there's social network. This comes out of the field of social networks, which has been around since the 1930s, and it's lived in sociology and various other areas. And so that's been a serious enterprise, but generally, of course, dealing with smaller networks, right? Because you actually had to ask people, which is still a very valuable thing to do. You had to ask people what was going on. So there are people from all sorts of fields, right? And I don't know if there's no real, well, we have geomorphology, so there's earth sciences here, of course, biology and so on, huge things. Okay, I think we should stop there. I was going to, I will see if I can hand out an assignment to you today, just to get going. It's a bunch of networks to measure some things about. It won't, of course, be due until next week, but I'll see if I can get that up, kind of running. My little scripts to not explode. So generally speaking, we will start at 2:30. And I appreciate you holding on there today. So thank you, very good. And we have a lot of fun. It's great stuff. All right.